telling if somebody's lying to you is not an instantaneous thing. It's a thing that takes time. Whether it takes 5 minutes or 5 days, the power isn't in how quickly you do it. The power is in that you know how to do it.
Off the bat, share a bit about your background and what led you to become a CIA intelligence officer.
Yeah, so I'm just a brown kid from Pennsylvania, man. Like, that's all I am. I'm 43 years old. I was born in 1980, grew up in Pennsylvania in a rural part of the state. And I just kind of never thought, I'm just like everybody, I feel like every little boy, at least in the 80s, was going to be a police officer or going to be a fireman or going to be a spy. That's what we all wanted to be. So I was just that little boy, just like so many of us, right? And I went to a military school, went into the military from there. The military told me that I wasn't qualified for intelligence. So then I kind of let go of that dream. And then when I left the military, I got tapped on the shoulder by CIA.
Whoa.
And that's essentially how it works. And I was like, you mean I am good enough? I do get picked for the kickball team?
That's amazing. Why did they say at that point that you weren't able to go into that?
So the military is very different. Uniformed military service is very different than the civil service, which is what CIA is, right? So inside the military, they have a much more rigorous, structured approach to how they develop personnel and what those people do. It's called needs of the service. So if there happens to be a need for police officers, they're going to make you a police officer. If there happens to be a need for pilots, you're going to be made a pilot. It's the needs of the service.
Whoa.
Right? Which is really interesting considering the military recruitment crisis happening right now, if you didn't know about that in the United States.
I didn't.
We have the worst recruitment crisis in history.
Wow.
This has never happened before because we only became a volunteer force after Vietnam. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff to it, but essentially the needs of the service are no longer being met because they can't recruit enough people. CIA works completely differently. CIA doesn't care about the needs of the CIA. They care about how you are cognitively wired, personality wired, and then they plug you into the right position if you meet, all of the different rubric that they're looking for in a CIA officer. So I was trying to actually go into the Peace Corps after I left the military. I was trying to take a completely different approach to life. And because I had come from a government background and because I was filling out an application online for the Peace Corps, I just tripped over some kind of online algorithm and the agency found me from there.
Whoa. So what is it about your personality that was attractive to them?
So I found this out much later, and it's not flattering stuff. It's not like I'm smart, and that was what they were attracted
or
to. Or
super charismatic and socially outgoing and adaptable.
So the adaptable piece definitely played in. What they're really looking for is people who are morally and ethically flexible.
Interesting.
So that's what attracted them, or what made me attractive to them, right? I don't really believe in hard, fast rules. Like, I don't believe in following rules. I don't think that there are many absolute truths at all. So you need something done, I can find a way to rationalize why I would do it. And that's something that's really important in the agency because the work that they do oftentimes requires that you are pliable in your ethics and your morals.
Super interesting. And then from the standpoint of adaptability, what is that?
So a lot of that, there's a certain level of intelligence that's required, and adaptability and resilience and perseverance and tenacity, right? And risk tolerance. All of these things are different kind of pillars along the way because they know that they're putting you into situations where you have to independently come up with your own solutions. So that's something we're all very familiar with. The only difference is CIA puts you into situations that are a little bit more higher stakes, and the time constraints have real constraints. So we all know what it's like to work against the timeline, and we all know what it's like to have more tasks than resources. The difference is we don't often have the experience of dealing with those things in a hostile foreign environment where you're actively being hunted, right? So there's these extra layers of stakes that it's really important that they know how to predict your response to that kind of pressure in advance. And there are certain telltale signs in your psychograph that they can find through their application process.
Yeah, so how do they test for all this? What is a psychograph?
Dude, it's the application process is a 3-interview process, and each interview takes about 3 days. So there's always a personal element where you're sitting across from a trained intelligence officer who's actively interviewing you. There's always a test, a time-constrained actual test kind of scenario. Sometimes they're psychological batteries, sometimes they're problem tests. I mean, I had to do a puzzle Like a no shit puzzle
Whoa.
was one of the things that I had to do during one of the application processes, right? Or one of the application interviews. And then there's group tests, and there's individual tests, and there's role plays, and there's all these things that go into this very long, drawn out 9-month process. And during it, everything's being measured, everything's being assessed, and it's all being put under your file to see if you qualify for the next level of review.
Wow. Are you armed as an intelligence officer?
This is one of the big misnomers that's out there. Outside of the United States, guns are not common.
Interesting.
So if you want to be undercover and blend in, guess what you don't ever carry?
A gun?
So,
Wow.
I mean, I hate to break your heart with James Bond, but yeah, you don't carry guns. We don't carry guns anywhere if you're operating undercover. If you're operating in an area of active hostilities, like a war zone, even then you will carry like maybe a 9mm. You'll carry something that's consistent and congruent with what people carry in that active area of hostility, but you've got bodyguards, right? So when a CA officer is working in an area that's an active, hot conflict zone, they'll have a group of people whose job is to protect that officer. So you still are trained not to pull your gun until essentially everybody else is dead.
Wow. Yeah, Hollywood portrays the life of a spy probably very differently than how reality unfolds.
Yeah, and it makes sense because if you just think about it, a spy is supposed to be executing a clandestine operation. Clandestine means secret. Secret means not discoverable. Daniel Craig is quite discoverable, right? Think about every James Bond. They're dashing, they're handsome, they're charismatic. They usually are undercover as some kind of wealthy, like public-facing individual, and then they inevitably end up in a boat or a car shooting out of the window, killing people on the side of the street. It's very hard to self-evacuate from a location after you've committed that many crimes. So for us, the pillar of professional intelligence is getting in, doing your operation, and getting out, and having nobody ever even know you were there.
Fascinating. How does being a spy change the way that you view life? I mean, I'm sure like even walking into a crowded room, like that's a fundamentally different experience for you as it would be for me.
Yeah, it changes your life in so many ways. It's such a huge question. I'm only going to kind of jump into one small area. So going through intelligence training starts with retraining your brain, right? Creating something called a mission mindset, rather than what we all have, which is called a conventional mindset. So the very first, 2 or 3 days of training is basically, here's your conventional mindset, here's what conventional mindset means, here are the pillars of conventional mindset, and here's what we're going to turn you into, mission mindset. And just to give you kind of like a tangible example of what that feels like, it's like being at an optometrist and they switch through all these different lenses, and then eventually there's a lens that they land on, and like, the world comes to life.
Whoa.
Have you had that experience with getting your eyes tested?
Yeah, getting an eye exam. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, there it is. Everything's clear and sharp and crisp, and you're like, how have I been living in this world and I've never seen it this way?
Wow.
That's what it's like when they first start training you. So they have to get you there, because once you have seen the world through the eyes of a spy, you'll do anything to keep that clarity.
Interesting.
Which is then what makes it so that you're willing to do all the ethically and morally flexible things you have to do.
So what is it? So what a mission mindset? What is that like, having that mindset?
So it's first of all, it's very practical. It's a very practical approach to life, which very few of us actually have. Most people abandon practical solutions in favor of moral solutions, belief-based solutions, frameworks that are based on principles.
Interesting. Rather
Rather than practicalities. When you move into the practicality space, you start to realize that basically any outcome you want is achievable through a set of practical decisions that you make, right? Want to lose weight? There's a practical way to do that. Why is it that people want to lose weight but don't do it? Because they have some other belief system that blocks the way, right? You want to change the way your body feels. You want to solve any kind of problem. You name it. There's a practical way to do it, but oftentimes we let our principles or our bad habits or our conveniences or our preferences stand in the way. Mission mindset is about getting past all of those things, sticking to the simple, basic, practical steps, including something as simple as just taking one step, right? It's a pretty powerful thing. And what's challenging is you have to be separated from society oftentimes. You have to be taken out of your comfort zone before you give yourself the space to see it. And CIA does that so well, because we all train at a place called the farm. The farm is it's a colloquial term that we call the secret base where we're all trained. And the
Wow.
course that we train in is called Field Tradecraft, FTC, the Field Tradecraft course. And when we go to this course, they literally separate us from society. They put us in this base where we live for a long time, separate from everything else in the world. And it's that distance that allows us to start going through the process of flipping the different lenses.
Whoa. So getting out of your comfort zone is like step one to adopting a more mission-based mindset.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, step one is accepting the invitation
Wow.
to get out of your comfort zone. And a lot of people won't even accept that invitation.
Wow. Okay, so walk me through some of the other steps, because I feel like this is a really practical way to approach life, any goals that one may have.
Yeah, so another very strong kind of element in that is understanding where what's called a locus of control. There's an external locus of control and there's an internal locus of control. We live in a society where the whole purpose of society, the purpose of government, the purpose of society, the purpose of community is to create efficiencies for the whole, right? That's why we gather. That's why two people live in a house.
Yeah.
There's efficiencies that are captured, but only one house is required. It's what makes us all kind of embarrassed as Americans that every house has a car for every adult. It's just a grotesque waste. Every car has 4 seats, and every single person has a car.
Has their own car. Yeah, that is funny.
Yeah, so it's a waste of resources essentially, but it's all got to do with this external locus of control. We do what other people expect of us because we want to make them happy. We want to seek validation. We want to be part of the community. And what we fear the most is being extradited, being ostracized from the community, especially if it's a community that we've chosen, that we believe in, that we feel connected to, and then to have them kick us out is a very difficult feeling. So that's all based on something called external locus of control. An internal locus of control means that you're in control of your own outcomes. You don't need to depend on the approval, the agreement, the permission of anybody else. You just do what you need to do to get the outcome that you want. It actually takes a process to get you to not only see and understand academically the 2 principles, but to behaviorally change your fundamental response away from external controls towards internal controls. It actually takes a retraining, a rewiring of the way that your brain normally works, because your brain is normalized, conditioned to work towards the external locus of control.
So how do they like in the service encourage that mindset shift?
A lot of it is through what they call just-in-time learning or experiential learning. So just-in-time learning means I'm going to teach you a concept, and then you're going to go do it right away. It's not like college where we teach you a concept, you go back to your room. You come back 2 days later, we teach it to you again, and maybe you get a quiz. And you go back to your room. And then you come back, and then we review your quiz, and then we prepare you, we warn you to study, and then there's a test in 2 days. And then you go back to your room, and you come back, and that's all academic. You've never once applied the concept that you were supposed to have learned. The way CIA does it differently is they teach you a concept, no quiz, no test, no academics, go do the thing. And then you literally it's like someone teaching you addition, and then they give you blocks and they ask you to count the blocks. And then once you do it right, they're like, great, now let's do multiplication. Now multiply the blocks. And you just keep up. You either keep up or you get cut out.
Damn. Are there any representations in pop culture that you think are more accurate portrayals of what it is that you do?
Yeah, so Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was quite good.
Really?
Yeah, if you recall that, because the lead in that movie was very kind of muted, and that's really what most CIA officers are.
Interesting.
We're muted individuals. We can turn on things, we can turn on charisma, we can turn on charm, we can turn on social grace, but when we walk around, all that gets turned off and further intentionally muted because we don't want to be noticed. The goal is anonymity. Anonymity is a superpower. So that's one great example of it. A lot of Lugavere's book, he's got multiple stories out there.
What's the name of his book? Do you know?
He's got multiple.
Oh.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Oh, he wrote that.
Yeah, is one of those books that come from a Lugavere character, right? And there's all sorts of history around the author and whether or not he himself was an asset for MI6 or possibly an officer for MI6. So you'll see all sorts of cool examples of what we're really like there. And there was one Bond episode, one Bond movie. What's the one where he runs off to the tropical island and It's a Daniel Craig one.
Oh, nice.
He runs off to the tropical island. He's going through like depression, and Q has to go to the island to get him. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, Skyfall is when he gets. It's the third one. He gets shot, and they think he's dead, and he ends up kind of retiring in Turkey.
Maybe that's the one. So whichever one has Daniel Craig depressed and alone on an island.
Yeah, it's Skyfall. It's the beginning of Skyfall.
They do a very good job of actually getting to the heart of what most CIA officers actually feel.
Interesting.
Because it's a very lonely job. It's a very lonely job. And then we've been cultivated from a group of people. Like we've been cultivated from society because we don't trust other people, right? Like we don't. When I walked into your house today, I gave you a hug.
Yeah.
I had to learn to do that. Like it's one of the things I do for myself to try to break down my own barrier of immediate distrust, right? I'm like, you let me into your home. You like let me onto your show. Like you are risking your own professional, political, whatever, to have me here. So I feel like you're demonstrating all this trust for me. The least I can do is work to make sure that I build a similar kind of trust for you, right? And it's because we are so distrusting of other people that we end up very, very alone.
Do you find that your training? Do you find that you have the tendency to be in a hyper vigilant state because of your training?
It's not because of the training. It's because of what happens before the training. So CIA officers writ large are high performers. And one of the things that CIA teaches us is that they seek out high performers to become officers at CIA, which makes sense. But what they've done at CIA is they've been able to empiricalize and systematize the recruitment process so they can actually find people who are high performers even before the people demonstrate high performing tendencies. Because they've learned that there's a correlation between childhood trauma and high performance. So there's a certain amount of childhood trauma that leads to a high performing adult.
Interesting.
Too much trauma leads to an adult that's got coping mechanisms that prevent them from being optimized. Too little trauma leads to an adult who doesn't really have the motivation or the desire to be high achieving. So you have to find like the right, it's like tuning a guitar.
It's like that middle ground, the Goldilocks.
You've got to find that right combination, and then you have a high performing officer. So for CIA, they know how to look for the data points that suggest high performance, and then find you when you're just young enough that you may not necessarily realize how high performing you really are, 24 to 28, right? And then they put you through their own vetting process where they can confirm that you actually have the elements that they're looking for, and then they put you through a training program that's been cultivated and perfected over time to unlock your abilities.
Were you adopted?
No.
Oh.
Yes. Actually, technically, I was adopted. My father died before I was born. I was raised by a single mom for the first 5 years. She married my stepdad, who then formally adopted me. So to answer your question, yes, I was.
You know why I asked that?
No.
Because James Bond was adopted. Not only was James Bond adopted, essentially, but Batman. I mean, Batman was kind of orphaned, right?
True.
Yeah.
True. Alfred adopted him.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I would love to put myself in the same category as Batman and James Bond, but I don't think it's quite appropriate.
Dude, I would put you in that category if you'd let me. So, I mean, you've attained all these insane skills, and like all we can do on this episode of the show is scratch the surface, barely that even. But of all the things that you've learned, like what can my listeners take away in terms of like the skills that they might be able to adopt that can radically improve their life, their health, et cetera? I mean, I feel like there's so much, you have so much knowledge to offer.
It's so, I asked myself this question, not exactly this question, but something similar before I came here today, because you're the first person to invite me into a conversation that has any overlap in the health space.
Yeah.
I've been on a lot of conversations that had to do with, geopolitics and had to do with current events and had to do with, you name it. Even like hip hop culture. But you're the first one to introduce me to an audience that's like looking for health solutions.
Yeah, health audience. Yeah, wellness minded.
Wellness minded, exactly right. And wellness and health play a huge role at CIA.
Interesting.
I mean,
how so?
I mean, everything from the fact that we have our own exercise scientists on site, and they're dedicated to training field officers individually. So like we have 2 gyms in the main headquarters building, and those gyms are staffed with professional trainers whose exclusive job is to test and prepare field officers for field operations. That's it.
And field operations is like being out in the world, like espionage, being a spy.
Right. And even that has 1,000 shades of gray, because some spies are paramilitary spies who are out there, coordinating laser strikes and actually bringing in cruise missiles and killing terrorists. Other spies are sitting in cafes in Paris, like schmoozing with world leaders, and they've got a pot belly. There's all sorts of spies. There's spies that have that are not neurotypical, that are very much on the autism spectrum. There are some spies who are polyglots and have multiple languages under their belt. There's all sorts of spies, everybody you could imagine, because you need that kind of diversity for the world that we live in.
Whoa.
But what we all have in common is that if we don't maintain some semblance of consistent, congruent health, then every dollar that's invested in us is a dollar at risk by the federal government.
Interesting.
Because without a spy, you have no way of collecting secrets and intelligence from overseas. So you need the spy to function for as long as possible, even if that is a 55-year-old male spy who's 25 pounds overweight. You still need to find a way to optimize his performance in the field for what he brings to the table.
Wow. So what do they teach you? What are the secrets?
So the biggest one that I wanted to talk about was understanding that self-discipline is a myth, right? So there's so much out there talking about self-discipline and how self-discipline has to almost be like a battle with yourself. You have to choose to be disciplined. CIA teaches us that the whole concept of discipline is a resource-intensive approach that has a negative return on investment, right? So it takes a great deal of resources to meet a certain level of discipline, and then the returns you get from those resources are diminishing. So until you have a negative return on investment. So think about how hard people work to be disciplined. And then what happens when you slip up? Then you beat yourself up. You talk trash about yourself. All the head trash kicks in. You're like, oh, I'm never going to be good enough. I'm never going to be smart enough. I suck at keeping a diet. I suck at getting rest. It's this dynamic trail of flushing yourself down the toilet. So they teach us to just let go of discipline, let go of the whole concept of self-discipline, and instead adopt a mission mindset that's focused on consistency. Consistency is actually easy. Discipline is very hard. So as an example, wake up and drink a glass of water every day. That doesn't take a lot of discipline, right? It's like, wake up and drink a glass of water. Does that mean wake up and immediately drink a glass of water? No. It means wake up, go pee, drink a glass of water? Sure. Wake up, eat, drink a glass of water? Sure. We don't care. But drink 500 milliliters of water after you wake up, right? And before you go to work. That kind of thing is actually really easy to adopt, and it's life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. We can go into all the physiological reasons as to why it's life-changing, but when you understand that the real magic of it is giving yourself permission to be consistent instead of, beating yourself up about not having self-discipline, it changes the whole dynamic. And that applies to everything from exercise to saying kind words to your kids to, doing a little bit of work every day. It's just a matter of being consistent.
Yeah. And so what do you do when, for example, you miss a day? What is the self-talk for when you falter, right? Because not every day is going to be a quote unquote perfect day.
Right. So consistency means that you're always trying to be consistent. It doesn't mean that seeking consistency in and of itself is a practice of consistency.
Oh, I like that.
More than actually being consistent, right? So you miss a day, you acknowledge you missed a day. Okay, I'll make it up. I'll do it tomorrow. I missed a day. I consistently miss every 8th day. Wow, I just unlocked something about myself, right? For some reason, I have capacity to maintain, a consistent schedule for 7 days, but not 8 days. Now I can actually ask myself the question, what's happening on day 7 that makes it so I can't do this on day 8? Change that thing, and now, boom, now you make it to 15 days, right? But you have to be able to have without consistency, you can't measure your own progress.
Right.
You have to be able to measure your own progress to be able to empirically go back and change your system so that you can make additional progress. So it's a very boring, nerd-friendly approach to optimizing yourself, but that's how we do it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I recently did, from January through about May, I was on a bit of a fat loss journey. I did a cut, I was about 15, 16% body fat. I got myself down to about 9% body fat. And the way to do that, I mean, it's like consistency is the name of the game.
Absolutely.
And you really, day to day, you don't really see progress day to day. Like the scale goes up, it goes down. It's not linear, right? Like it's not like you're losing body fat or losing weight, which is the easiest kind of metric to track, right? Because I have a scale in my bathroom. It's not like that declines on a day-to-day basis. Your weight is influenced by water retention, how many carbs you ate the day before, temperature, even like inflammation from a good workout the prior day. I mean, that will make you store more water, and you'll see the scale go up, right? But it's like only when you zoom out are you able to see the progress, and you only progress when you consistently stick to, in the case of fat loss, a calorie deficit, a diet that allows you to sustain a calorie deficit.
Right. So you touched on something I think that was really powerful there. One of the things that we're always encouraged to do at the agency that's different from what conventional people are taught. Conventional means it's just like what society expects of you.
Yeah.
You're taught to visualize your goal, look for your goal, and then always measure your success against the goal you're trying to achieve. Right? Makes sense. We've all heard that before. It makes sense. That's what we're all doing. I want to be a vice president. Today I'm a senior director, so I'm 2 steps away from my goal. What CIA teaches us to do is look from where you started from to where you are. So always look back to determine your level of success. Don't look forward to determine your level of success, because the end goal can very well change. President changes, end goal changes. Mission needs change, end goal changes. International disaster happens, end goal changes. So you can never count on the end goal to be consistent.
Yeah.
But you can always count on the starting point to be consistent. So you can always measure your success and your progress against where you started from, but you can't always measure your success and your progress against where you're trying to go.
Well, how do you stay flexible then? Because like you're being sent all around the world, right? You're in a different location every day potentially, and yet you have these goals and these practices that you need to stay consistent with. So how do you maintain a flexible mindset when your external environment is constantly changing?
Because you understand that the continuity is the internal environment, right? Your choice and your power of choice is the thing that goes with you everywhere you go, right? Your mission mindset is the thing that goes with you everywhere. So whether you're in India or whether you're in Pakistan or whether you're in Brazil, if you have the focus on having water every day after you wake up, it doesn't matter where you are. And you'll find your way to clean water, and you'll be prepared to have that clean water. If you're committed to having the right balance of low-fat meats, high-carb foods, your right mix of grains and vegetables and everything else, you'll just find the local versions of every one of those categories, right? And that's what you'll do.
Yeah.
And then there's also an element here where you have to accept something that Hollywood doesn't ever kind of demonstrate. We don't thrive in the operational environment. We often say that your best health is the first day you arrive on an op. From that day on, you're deteriorating every day. You're losing sleep, you're increasing stress, you're reducing your caloric intake, you're getting worse. You're going to get sick, you're going to get chased, it's only going to get worse after you arrive. So your best day is the day you arrive. So you really want to be in optimal condition the first day of a mission. And all you need to do is start accepting that you're going to go from a thriving-based operation to a survival-based operation by the time it's all over. And then you come back to Langley or headquarters or whatever else. You go partner up with your trainer and you start the process of rebuilding, reconditioning, and essentially healing from the damage you did to yourself on the op.
Wow. Do they set you up with a trainer?
Absolutely.
So
a
you
nutritionist, a trainer. We call them exercise scientists because that's technically what they are. So they're holistically, they cover all gambits of what you need to rapidly recover from the deterioration of being on an op.
From a nutrition standpoint.
Nutrition and physical, yeah.
Yeah. What kind of guidance do they give you?
So they guide our supplement use. They guide our dietary choices. They do it all based on VO2 measurements, body fat measurements, the composition of your body, where your age is, where your heart health is, et cetera, right? They're able to kind of calculate what's optimal for you to get you back into essentially the kind of condition you need to go back out in the field. Not what's optimal for you to be a dad or to be a professional, but optimal to get you back in the fight. So it's never a game of being 100%. It's a game of getting you back to 80%.
Wow. Do they stress train you? Like training in super high heat temperatures if you might potentially have a mission in this, I don't even know, like some super hot part of the world.
Yeah, so the problem with that kind of boundary testing, because that's what you're talking about, is like
boundary testing.
Yeah, boundary testing is that it's very costly. And it's in the world of intelligence, it's still a bureaucracy. It's still a government organization. So they can only do what they can justify. They can only get the money that they can justify from Congress that they need for a priority. So some people will go and do, exercises in the deserts in California or Nevada to prepare for what they're going to see when they go to the Middle East. But not everybody. For the vast majority, the bell curve, the middle of the bell curve of your intelligence officers, they'll be taught the theory, and they'll be taught the tactics. And then when they go on deployment, they'll usually have an element that's already there that will help them acclimate to the environment, but that's it. It's really only a few very specially trained officers that will be truly boundary tested before they go in to carry out a high risk, high reward kind of op.
Damn, so cool, dude. Holy cow. Amazing. You have a podcast, right?
I do.
Yeah, I've listened to it. It's great.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my podcast is called the Everyday Spy Podcast. We've been blessed to be in the top 10 on iTunes in our category, social sciences.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We recently expanded into the YouTube space to bring more of like a visual element to it, which I'm super excited about because, we've had great success with an audio podcast, but we've also seen that there's an incredible audience that needs to be served on YouTube. So it's been a cool transition to kind of move from being just a voice to being more of a at-home studio like this.
Yeah, it's dope. What are some of your most popular topics that you cover on the show?
Psychological application of spy skills is easily the most popular topic. So whether we're talking about how to get people to see things your way, or whether we talk about how to kind of read people's minds or read people's behaviors, body language, all that stuff is very much, in the popular vein of things. And then geopolitics is also very popular, what's happening in the world right now, and predictive analysis about what's going to happen in the future.
How do you read people's behavior?
There's a lot of different ways to do that. But so if you boil it down into its most basic form, all relationships are transactions. And every time you are co-located with another person, you're in some kind of relationship, which means there will be some kind of transaction. Even if I'm a cute girl and you're a cute guy and we're at a coffee shop and we're not talking to each other, there's still transaction happening.
Interesting.
Right? I look at you, you look at me. That's a transaction. That's an exchange. It's an exchange of what we call social capital, which is the currency of relationships. Right? That's why a lot of times flirtation starts when one person looks at another person. There's an exchange, right? That exchange is also known as a transaction. So I look at you, you look at me, we've just exchanged, we've had a transaction, the beginning of a relationship is there.
Wow.
So if you kind of advance that into any number of, whether it's professional applications or personal applications or parenting applications, anywhere you go, you start to see that there's this constant transaction, this exchange of a currency that we call social capital that creates an environment of reciprocity where you want to return a favor or I want to return a favor. We want to return and exchange the value of the currency that we're exchanging. When you learn how that works, then you see it play out in both verbal communication and nonverbal communication. So you start learning like which verbal words are higher level currency, which nonverbal behaviors are lower value currency. And if you want to build currency, build capital very quickly, you use high currency words, high currency actions, and then all of a sudden the other person feels indebted to you subconsciously for reasons they don't even understand.
Whoa.
And you can essentially direct and control their behavior from there.
Can you tell when somebody's lying?
Yes. You can tell that through many, many tools before you ever have to worry about what's very popular, which is what people call micro expressions. So if you've ever heard the term micro expression or people talking about lie detection through micro expressions like twitching of the eyes or the number of blinks or what happens on the face, those are very nuanced ways of determining if somebody is lying. Some of the easier things you can do is just listen and read body language and verbal language against what you know to be the baseline that person has.
Interesting. So if there's like a change.
Correct. That's what you're looking for, is you're looking for the delta. the difference between the baseline and their response to a certain question. And even then, you don't know. It's not like a smoking gun. That was a lie.
Yeah.
It's more like a data point where you're like, I assessed that there was mistruth somewhere.
Wow.
So then you ask another relevant, related question and see if you get the same indicator again. And then you do that 4 or 5, 7 times because there's a relationship and a transaction, right? Telling if somebody's lying to you is not an instantaneous thing. It's a thing that takes time. Whether it takes 5 minutes or 5 days, the power isn't in how quickly you do it. The power is in that you know how to do it.
But you still have to know where to look, right?
Right.
To be able to identify a change.
Correct.
So it's in the nonverbal behavior, the verbal languaging.
Yep.
I guess you could say.
Yep. So for example, right, nonverbal behavior, when you suspect that somebody is lying, you're looking for nonverbal behavior that demonstrates a threat response.
People are going to be using this against their spouses.
I mean, and they're not using it.
Sorry, not sorry.
They're not using it against. They're just using it during the transaction.
Yeah.
Right. But so an example of like a defensive nonverbal movement is when people cross. When they cross their arms, when they put their legs together, when they cross their feet like this.
Like this?
Yep. That is an indicator of threat-based defensive behavior, which suggests that there's something happening that's making you feel threatened. When we lie, the thing that makes us feel threatened is the lie itself. That the lie might be detected, that we might be called out, that we understand that we're creating a situation in which things could get worse, right? We're our own threat. So a crossing of the arms, a blocking of the arms, a touching of the face, this is one of the most vulnerable parts on the human body.
The neck.
So when people reach up here and they pet and they stroke or they do anything like this is an indicator that they're feeling threatened.
Damn. But it could be a false positive, right? Because I'm comfortable standing like this sometimes.
So you're right. It could be a false positive. That's why it's so important to understand the baseline first.
Got it.
This position is not a position you've taken at all during the entire history of this podcast.
That's fair to say.
Yeah. So that's your baseline is this position.
Yeah. So if I suddenly went like this while you were asking me a question,
I would make an assessment note about it and understand that there was something about the topic that we just started covering that you found defensive. That doesn't mean I offended you.
Yeah.
It could mean this topic is boring. It could mean that you just had a thought that crossed through your head about family or finances or whoever knows that made you trigger in a defensive way.
Interesting.
But it's just one data point. It's not a conclusion. It's not an assumption.
Yeah.
It's a data point that we use for assessment.
Wow. Damn, learning so much.
That was the goal, dude. That was the goal.
I mean, I feel like that's probably one of the more important phenomena to be able to identify, right? Lying, like when you're a spy, like being able to tell when somebody's lying to you.
It's less about being able to understand when somebody's lying to you and more about being able to interpret their threat response. Because the more threatened someone feels, the more likely they are that they will lie. The less threatened someone feels, the less likely they are to come up with fabrication. So a big part of what we do is we really just try to understand what's the level of threat that the other person is feeling and how can we assess and or reduce any perceived threat that that person is experiencing right now. And like one of the ways that we can reflect and reduce the amount of stress or the amount of tension is through a process we call mirroring. So when I first started this show with you, right, I was all like leaning forward, hands on the table. I was like, let's talk. I'm super excited to do this. But you were in this position.
Yeah.
You weren't adopting my position. So I was like, I am in a different energy space than Max.
Interesting.
And if I want to make sure that Max is comfortable, I need to adopt Max's position. So I put my arms under the table and I sat myself back, right? And we can review the footage and you'll see how it works. But that mirroring process actually puts the subconscious mind at ease. It puts your subconscious mind at ease, but it also puts my subconscious mind at ease. And when my mind is at ease, I'm less likely to threaten you, which means you're less likely to feel threatened, which means that we're in a net positive relationship and the transactions are something that are going to be more predictable.
Wow. So what's the takeaway for people listening that when engaging in a social transaction, do your best to mirror the person that you're transacting with?
So there's let's break it into 3 kind of categories, right? The first basic, most important thing I want everyone to take away is that relationships are transactions. If that hurts your feelings, that's fine. You're wrong. Relationships are transactions. Accept and embrace that they're transactional. If you do that, then all the assholes out there that don't believe that will be one step behind you because you understand that it's a transaction. The second most important thing I want people to understand is during that transaction, you build what's known as social capital. The words that you say, the behaviors that you use create, just like money, they create value that gets exchanged between people. When you pour value into somebody, they feel like they have to pour value back. If you give someone attention, it makes them feel like they have to give you attention. If you reject someone's pleas for attention, you will invite them to reject when you need attention. And that's how marriages fail, because people they don't see the currency that's being exchanged, and nobody likes to invest in a losing account. So then they just stop investing, right? So first, understand relationships are transactional. Second, the transaction currency is called social capital. And then only after you've understood and demonstrated both of those things to yourself, then start learning how you can take advantage of the opportunity to create non-verbal currency through mirroring. Because the easiest way to build currency is through verbal communication, right? As long as everybody speaks the same language. That's way easier and way less nuanced than physical nonverbal cues.
Wow.
Right? Just go up to somebody and say, you look really nice today. Right? Would you like a cup of coffee? I'm about to go grab myself a decaf. Would you like one too? Simple things like that, you're going to see the currency right away. You'll see it right away. You'll see it when you come back with their cup of coffee and they're like, wow, this is really nice of you. I really appreciate it. It's been kind of a rough day. Hey, how's the family? They're trying to reciprocate their gratitude for you going out of your way to bring them a cup of coffee.
Wow.
If you can start to see it for the transaction that it is, then you can determine when you want to invest, who you want to invest in, and how much you want to invest.
Wow. Is there an advantage to making the first investment, being the first investor, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called first mover advantage.
Wow.
Right? So the first mover advantage is that you get to set the stage for everything. What direction the social capital is going, what level of exchange happens, how strong the reciprocation is, what the total value of the transaction is. If you're the one who's moving first, you set the stage for all of those things, right? The equivalent of that in verbal communication is asking questions. In this conversation, you're the one asking questions. I'm the one answering questions. Who has control of the conversation?
Me?
Why?
Well, because I guess, I'm the MC.
I'm going to go wherever you steer me.
Yeah, fair.
You're going to set the question. You could come up with a question that's completely out of nowhere. I'm going to follow suit.
Yeah.
Right? What am I going to do? Argue with the person who's asking questions? That's not what we do as human beings. So that's first mover advantage.
Be entertaining for the listeners.
So it's always in your best interest.
I love it.
To be the one that moves first.
Is there any truth to that, like the Dale Carnegie stuff, like, a person's favorite sound is the sound of their own name?
So
like that kind of stuff?
There's absolutely truth in the Dale Carnegie stuff, but you have to understand that at the time that was written, it wasn't written with an operational lens towards, maximizing what was known of psychology and what was known of, effective influence practices. It was kind of one guy's ideas on how to build influence. That's completely different than what CIA does. CIA has 170 years worth of history cultivating and perfecting the influence process. Right? Before CIA, they were called OSS. OSS taught CIA. MI6 taught OSS. Right? And MI6 has been around for a long time. So you have this history of professionalized intelligence practices, professionalized influence tactics that Dale Carnegie just didn't have.
Damn, so interesting. Man, this is so crazy. How do you get people to? I guess you've kind of already went into how to get people to like you, right? Like how to build rapport and establish relationships. And I feel like that can probably be very useful for dating, for in the professional environment, winning friends and being able to
closing business, man. Business. Think about just pricing products. You have a book, right? You have a book, you speak, you do all sorts of things that drive your livelihood.
100%.
Right? How do you choose the price for those things?
How do I choose the price? Man, that's a good question.
It's a good question.
Well, it's like supply and demand. Like we get so many offers, and we can't obviously appease all of the offers, right? And so we price it in accordance with how many offers we're getting.
Right.
We kind of pit them one against one another. We use them as leverage against each other.
So when you follow that process, what ends up happening is if the demand decreases, what happens to the price?
Goes down.
You don't have control over that. External locus of control. The CIA solution to something like that is to do something that we call demand generation, where you do something, you take action to increase the demand. So you're intentionally turning the dial up on demand. You can also simultaneously turn the dial down on supply.
That's right.
And control your own price, right?
Well, I feel like it's easier to turn the dial down on supply, but how do you engineer demand?
That's where it gets to be all about understanding relationships and transactions, right? So for example, what you're doing right now with this podcast creates demand. I don't know if you've thought about that. It creates demand because everybody watching you episode after episode, they begin to interpret that they have a relationship with you.
Yeah.
Not me. I'm here for one episode. Then they forget about me, right? But they're with you every time. You're the voice in their ear. You're the picture on their screen, right? That makes them want you. What happens when somebody wants something? It's demand. So the question becomes, are you being seen by the people who decide whether or not you get booked for their event? If you're not sure whether or not those are the people seeing you, then you start to adjust your strategy to make sure that you're the person that they see. That's how you demand. That's how you generate demand. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So cool. I'm going to do that.
Referrals are a great source of that, right? A great example of that.
Because, your boy wants an Aston Martin.
Go get it.
It would be on brand.
You need it.
So did they give you like Tom Ford suits and Aston Martins when you joined the CIA?
No, I always thought that they would. I thought that the beautiful women in the cars would be issued to us. And then there, it's the opposite. Unfortunately, if you drive a nice car and have a hot girlfriend, everybody notices you. So
that's a fair point.
So you drive the busted old second generation Indian, import.
Damn.
Yeah. And you have a mangy dog at your side.
A mangy dog. Are there any like super memorable international out in the field experiences that you can share with us? Just like so we can, for a moment, live vicariously through you?
So the details are still classified. Like our operational history becomes the thing that we are under a lifetime secrecy agreement not to divulge.
Whoa.
So it's tough.
Yeah.
And my wife is also a former covert intelligence officer.
Whoa.
So we met and married at the agency, had our first child at the agency, and then left together. But we're in the process of trying to get CIA to clear a portion of our operational history so that we can answer questions like this in detail. But what I will say is that one of my favorite parts about traveling the world was wherever we went for an op, we always had to take a route afterwards to cleanse ourselves.
What do you mean by that?
So if you think about it, like when you go, I don't know, do you ski?
No.
Tell me something that you do that requires travel.
That's a good question. I'm a big indoor guy.
You're big. Well, that's okay. Let's just say that you liked to ski, and your favorite mountain was in Park City, Utah.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? How would you get to Park City, Utah?
I would take a flight.
Would you take a flight that intentionally has more than one stop?
No.
We would.
Interesting.
Because we want to obfuscate both the starting points and the destination of where we're going.
As much as you can.
So I could take a direct flight from Miami to LA. But if I do that, then anybody who sees my flight out of Miami knows I went to LA.
Yeah.
So instead, I'll take a multi-connecting flight that goes from Miami to Chicago to San Antonio to Los Angeles, or Las Vegas to Los Angeles.
Wow.
Now, anywhere along that route, if somebody finds me, they actually don't know where I was going to or where I was coming from. So what's nice about when you work any kind of covert op is that your cleansing routes become essentially your extended vacation. So you're like, I have to do this thing in Pakistan, or I have to do this thing in Georgia.
Yeah.
But I'm going to take a couple of days in Austria. I'll have a nice, dinner in Italy, and then I'll end up coming out through Frankfurt.
That sounds nice.
Yeah, that's the nice part about it.
Yeah. And I would imagine that you would have to have a very flexible mindset with regard to things like food, like foreign cuisines and things like that. There's a lot of people that have what I call like the 12-year-old boy diet. Like they're just very inflexible. They hold on to their preferences very strongly. And I would imagine that as somebody who has to be as adaptable as you, that you really can't hold on to your preferences too strongly.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You've heard of the phrase where like there's some people who live to eat and other people who eat to live.
Yeah.
We are mostly people who eat to live. So we break down our diet into core components, right? What's our carb? What's our fiber? What's our natural source of sugar? What's our protein? And you can get that anywhere, right? Does that mean that sometimes you're eating like dried salted fish? Yes, but you're not eating to enjoy it. You're eating to survive.
Yeah.
So you can let that go. It is difficult for foodies to do well at CIA.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever had to eat?
Snake.
You've eaten snake.
Yeah.
What the hell is that like?
It's like an overcooked version of scallop. Have you ever had like an overcooked scallop? It's like rubbery.
Super rubbery, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what like all snake tastes like. It's like a rubbery, stringy texture.
Ugh.
Yeah. It doesn't have a bad flavor. The flavor is whatever it was cooked in, but the texture is pretty unique.
Damn. Probably a good source of protein.
It's a great source of protein. I mean, like I've had other weird stuff too, but that was the one that always comes to mind. Like insects are weird, but people have heard of other people eating insects, right? And insects are just kind of crunchy. They're like empty, crunchy things, almost like eating seaweed.
Yeah.
But there's like, and I also ate dog meat, and dog meat is actually excellent.
Is it?
Yeah, it's quite good.
Where were you?
I was in Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Yeah, and dog is something they actually farm out there. They have farms where they raise dogs, and the purpose of the dogs is to be sources of meat.
Oh, it's so fucked up.
to the Western mind, it's pretty messed up.
Yeah.
But it's a very sustainable meat source.
But a dog is like literally, we've created dogs to be friendly. We've created them to be man's best friend. They're not
In the West.
in the West.
In Europe, dogs were created to be essentially slave labor.
Interesting.
Workers.
Interesting.
So in Southeast Asia, is it surprising that we created dogs to be food sources?
I guess not. That's so wild though. Like I don't go near foie gras. I don't go near veal. I just try to do my best. You know, I'm a passionate meat eater, but I try to do my best with like the humane. But yeah, I mean, I guess if I was in Southeast Asia and I had no other option.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really worry themselves with humane options because a lot of their options are just how do I eat?
Survival. Wow.
It's something we lose sight of that in the West. So, you know, one of the things that's been very challenging for me, gaining the experience of being with CIA, is understand, like, you really start to see the problems with your own country. When you spend so much time in other countries, you really start to see the problems with your own country. And one of the things that's really challenging is when you see how blind Americans have become to the fact that we are the richest country in the world. Even your poorest, poverty-stricken American makes 10 times what the average poverty-stricken person in the world makes. So it's insane. Like the fact that we say that it's a sad thing that people only eat fast food, they still eat.
Yeah.
There's people all over the world who don't eat, who can't eat. It's common in many parts of the world still to sell and trade your children in order to make sure you have enough food to feed the children you didn't sell or trade. And I don't mean like selling and trading into like slavery or into trafficking. I mean like selling and trading into marriages, into, you know, community diversity programs, like all sorts of stuff that we just can't even conceptualize here because we are so wealthy we don't even feel those pain points.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, if you're born and raised in the United States, you are so incredibly privileged. That's why there's so many people in this country that have lost sight of that. They're like, oh, I'm so oppressed.
Yes.
But it's like it's 2023. Everybody has an iPhone. You know, if you live in the U.S., if you're tweeting how oppressed you are, you're not freaking oppressed.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's super. And we get wrapped up around these things that we call injustices, right? Whether it's race-based or age-based, or whether it has to do with, you know, how animals are treated or how food is farmed. We get really hung up on what we call jokingly first world problems. These aren't actual problems. These are problems that only exist in the United States where it's a first world country. Even Europe, which is the closest thing to the United States, isn't anywhere near as wealthy as the United States. And a lot of that is because of the way their government is structured, right? Here we have a government that incentivizes wealth creation and wealth generation. In Europe, they have a government that doesn't encourage wealth creation and wealth development. It encourages wealth distribution, right? That's not good or bad. It's just the way it is. So as a result of that, they have lower GDP and lower income per capita than what we have here. Because yes, everybody hates the 1%, but the 1% are what bring up the averages for everything else in the United States.
Fascinating. Yeah, I love spending time in Europe. If you didn't, you live in the US, right?
Correct.
If you didn't live here, where in the world would you live?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. I've never been.
Oh my gosh. You want to have an excuse. to take a trip somewhere where you have to have multiple legs, go to New Zealand.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
It's like, it's all the best parts of the United States combined with like an old world charm and a self-contained country, right? They are so far removed from everything else that they've essentially created and cultivated a food economy where they only need their own island, right? So they can export, but they don't often export because it's easier and cheaper for them to just be, local farm to table kind of stuff for their own people.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, a lot of the rat race and the pressure of economic prosperity doesn't really strike them. So culturally, they're very laid back, very laissez-faire, very friendly, open people.
Amazing.
And what ends up happening is people from all around the world who go to New Zealand get bitten by that New Zealand culture, and then they stay too, and they adopt the culture. So then you still have diversity in the country, a diversity of skin color, diversity of intelligence, diversity of background, but culturally everybody adopts this whole come on in, have a seat, I'll make you a chai latte and we can eat some broccoli and lamb.
I love it.
It's glorious, man. Yeah.
Dude, the meat from there. We work with First Light Farms, which is a New Zealand-based. They produce Wagyu, 100% grass-fed, beef products, and also wild game, like elk, venison.
Oh, yeah.
My freezer right now is packed with meat from First Light Farms, and they're based in New Zealand. And I just know, the meat production there is pristine.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to see their factory process down there because they farm in mass like we do, but it's not factory farming, right?
Right.
You go down there and you see a sheep farm, and it's just incredible how it works. You see these sheep that are grazing on open fields, and the fields are pristine and beautiful. And then the sheep go through this process where, they're constantly sheared, constantly optimized to create the next round of wool. And then the farmers make money off the wool. They make money off the husbandry, they make money off the grazing land, and then only when needed do they then make money off of the slaughter. And they plan for the slaughter by making sure that whatever animal's about to be slaughtered has in its history provided more offspring that offset the loss when it's slaughtered, right? So it's very much it's a machine that's built with an eye of we're not going to import from somewhere else. We're going to keep ourselves sustainable.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I love it. That's so cool. I want to go. I've never been to Australia. I've never been to New Zealand, but
it's a long trip. But once you're there, just stick around for a while.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of Flight of the Conchords, which was a comedy duo. Do you remember that?
I do.
That show? Yeah, they were a New Zealand comedy musical duo, and and ever since becoming a fan of theirs, the country's been on my radar. And then, of course, finding out about the meat production and all that stuff. How many countries have you been to?
So I did this math recently, and I think it was 30-ish, 32 maybe.
Wow.
It's of the 7 continents, I've been on 6 of them. And there's still, there's 168, 167 countries, depending on whether or not Sudan is going to split again. So, yeah, there's new countries that are born pretty often. So.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So not long ago, Sudan split between Sudan and South Sudan. That added a new country, right? We just had a coup in Niger, and Niger was kind of like the hub of democracy in all of West Africa. If Niger splits, if there's any kind of civil war that creates 2 new countries there, that can happen too. And you've got countries inside of countries, like Lesotho inside of South Africa. So it's really interesting the way that the world is subdivided. Our 50 states are pretty steady, but that doesn't mean everybody is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Who knows whether Ukraine will stay one state?
Do you speak any other language?
So this is another place where the media get espionage wrong. So I have learned 4 languages total. I have been fluent in only English, right? We generally learn languages up to a base level fluency, like a 5th to 8th grade fluency, because it's not actually operationally advantageous to be native fluency in a foreign language. Because then when somebody has that level of fluency, they're very memorable, right? I don't know if you meet somebody with a really strong French accent, or if you meet somebody with a really strong Latino accent, they're actually easier to forget than when you meet someone who looks and dresses like a French person, but they speak perfect New York English.
Hmm.
Because then you're like, where did you learn your English?
Yeah, it's
right?
like cognitive dissonance.
Correct. And that makes enough of a impression in your short-term memory that your short-term memory will move that memory into long-term memory.
Fascinating.
And then that's not something you can control because it's happening. The other person is doing it. So the goal then is to make sure that you always fit the cut of not memorable so you can increase the probability that you'll never be moved to long-term memory.
Wow. And you're also like ethnically ambiguous. Like I couldn't.
Nice.
Yeah. Has that helped your career?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Being what I call ambiguously brown has been a fantastic benefit because nobody ever sees me and thinks that guy's American, right? And when I speak English or when I speak a foreign language with an American accent, then they hear that I am American, but everybody assumes in the world that America hates everybody except white Americans.
Interesting.
So it's like an instant bond when you're a brown American overseas, because then they're like, oh my gosh, I've heard about your country. You must have like a really hard life there, right? And it's just this instant bond with somebody.
What is your background?
I'm 3/4 Mexican, 1/4 Navajo Indian.
Wow.
And it comes out looking like somebody from the Middle East.
Or wherever. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't place you. And where were you born here?
I was born in Arizona and then grew up in Pennsylvania
Nice.
before I joined the military and became kind of I've lived in, I think, 11 different American states.
Wow.
So I really love our country because I've seen so much of it. And we really do have the best country in the world, even for all of its flaws. I would still choose here over anywhere else to raise a family and have kids, et cetera.
I love that. No, I love America. I'm a proud American. I mean, I love being abroad too, don't get me wrong. But no, I'm very grateful that I am born and raised here.
Yeah.
Can you fly a helicopter?
That's one thing I've always wanted to do. I've learned how to fly airplanes.
You can fly an airplane.
Yeah, and I've learned how to fly hand gliders it's a hang glider, and I've learned how to parachute.
Wow.
But like I've always wanted to learn how to fly a helicopter.
Did they
It's
teach
so
you this in the
incredibly
CIA, or is this like extracurricular?
The Air Force taught me how to fly an airplane. So when I was in the Air Force, I went to pilot training and I got my private pilot's license and I went on to fly turbo propeller jets or turbo propeller aircraft with the Air Force. And then on my own, I went and got into hang gliding because I always wanted to hang glide. The agency, a mix of the military into the agency is where I learned how to parachute. But that's not uncommon for a lot of folks who go through those training courses. But I really have fallen in love with air and wind-based energy. I love sailing. I love windsurfing. I love kite surfing. I even love just flying a freaking kite. There is so much power in Mother Nature that when you start to like tap into it, it's humbling. It's humbling to be reminded how weak and small we really are.
Oh, yeah.
Because a 5 foot by 10 foot triangle of cloth can help you fly in the sky. It's just amazing.
It's nuts. I mean, you want to see the power of Mother Nature? Go onto YouTube and search like big waves.
Yeah.
Like there
Oh my
are
gosh.
parts of the ocean where you would just be like beside yourself seeing the size of the waves. And some boats are designed to go through them. And so there's
incredible.
like all kinds of crazy footage on YouTube. I went down like a rabbit hole once recently, just watching like huge boats going through huge, like terrifying waves.
We spent time in Portugal recently, and it's amazing. Two things are amazing about Portugal. One, the waves off the coast of Portugal, and Portugal's just a small European country, right? It's like the size of Connecticut or something. It's a tiny little place, and it's amazing to see how massive the waves are. It's like the surfing capital of the world in many ways, because the big waves are so big. But what's equally amazing is that despite those ridiculously terrifying waves, they were also one of the most prolific ocean vessel, like sailing countries in the world, right?
Wow.
The Portuguese colonized most of Africa. How in the hell did they do that? That means they built ships and set those ships into the ocean knowing they had to go through those waves. Oh my gosh, it's just incredible.
It's insane. Damn. What is the coolest weapon you've ever fired? Are you a marksman? Like,
No.
are you?
I literally failed the marksman exam.
Oh, interesting.
So I never got the marksman medal.
Interesting.
Right? I didn't miss it by a lot, but I never got it. So
Well, you said earlier that you're not necessarily armed.
correct.
Right?
So I'm definitely not a marksman. But I don't, I feel like I'm not really one person. I'm not the right person to ask about cool weapons. I feel like weapon arrows are cool, like throwing knives are cool, handguns are cool, 9mm are cool, high caliber weapons are cool. I never got really into them, mainly because I didn't use many of them, right? I'm not a gun person. I like guns. I like the Second Amendment, but I'm not one who ever got jazzed about them.
Are there tactics that you use to get out, like verbal tactics that you use to get out of altercations?
Yes. So we do a lot of learning how to de-escalate through verbal means, right? And it's especially difficult because oftentimes when you have to de-escalate verbally, you're doing it with somebody who's not as fluent in English as you are when you're an intelligence officer.
Interesting.
Right? So you're de-escalating with a police officer who speaks English as like a second or third language somewhere else in the world. So it's really, really difficult because so much of your de-escalation technique has to rely on nonverbal communication. So you try to speak as little as possible, and you try to speak as elementary as possible, while also demonstrating very like submissive nonverbal cues so that you can de-escalate the situation. And at least that's how I interpret your question, right? Maybe you don't mean de-escalate, maybe you mean like mental judo to get somebody to like, set you free or whatever else. But like while you might see that in movies and cartoons and media, most of what we do is very, very simple, very basic. You want to either escalate because it's in your best interest or de-escalate because it's in your best interest. But either way, you're the one that's trying to take control of the situation.
Fascinating. What are some of those nonverbal submissive cues?
So being open, we were talking about closed positions.
Yeah.
Open positions are vulnerable positions. And the human subconscious recognizes that the center of your kind of existence, the center of your energy, if you will, is your chest and the top part of your stomach. All of your vital organs exist here.
Like a cat. Like when I come home and my cat rolls over and shows me its belly, that's a sign of affection because it's showing me the most vulnerable part of its body.
Correct. You're interpreting it as affection. What the animal is doing is demonstrating to its alpha that it's submissive.
Wow.
Right. So that's essentially what you're trying to do. Now, what we call that feigned compliance, because we're not actually complying. We're just feigning that we're complying in order to see predictable behavior from the threat that's threatening us. And if we don't successfully move through de-escalation techniques, we might have to move into escalation techniques or conflict or physical violence or whatever else to make sure that we can extricate ourselves from the situation.
Wow. So if you are confronted by somebody, if you're in some sort of conflict, and you want to attempt to de-escalate the situation, put your body, like suggest openness with your body.
Open palms, open chest.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to close off. You don't want to turn sideways. Like this is the kind of behavior that you're showing. You can keep eye contact, but you want to kind of turn your head down so that they don't feel like you're making yourself larger. You're actually making yourself kind of smaller. You're like, look, man, I'm not here to cause problems. I'm not here to make your life hard. I can get out of here in 2 seconds if you'll just let me go.
Wow.
Right? Like, you want my wallet? You can have my wallet. Like, everything I care about is sitting at home, right? In safe beds and behind locked doors. And there's nothing on me that you can't have right now.
Wow.
Like, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to just say yes to you. If they say yes to you, guess who's in control?
You're in control. Wow. So you want them to feel as unthreatened as possible.
Correct. And it goes completely against all the TikTok influencers and all the Instagram influencers that are like, when somebody puts a gun to your face, all you got to do is go whap, 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 whap.
Oh, no way.
And then take control. That's the fastest way to get yourself shot.
Exactly.
Right? Like just feign compliance, because guess what they don't want to do? They don't want to pull the trigger.
Right.
And the chances are that if they do pull the trigger, it's going to be because they either feel threatened or they have an accidental discharge. So your goal is just de-escalate and live another day.
Wow. Hands in pockets? Or is that...
Hands in pockets is threatening. They can't see the palms.
That's right. So keep your hands out of your pockets.
Yep. I mean, honestly, even if you just turn your palms out like this and put them down to your side.
Yeah.
Like, look, man, what do you do when you're confused? Right?
Yeah, you shrug. Yeah. Wow. Dude, that's super useful. Holy moly.
There's a reason that I have a business. I call my company Everyday Spy. I wear the shirt, right? The reason I call it Everyday Spy is because one of the huge things that media gets wrong is that the most dangerous part of being a spy isn't being on an operation. You've trained for the operation. You've got equipment for the operation. You've got an entire support team for the operation. The most dangerous part about being a spy is everyday life. Because if you let your consistency slip, you sign a receipt in the wrong name, you carry your actual personal phone along with your operational phone, you log into your own personal email account from a computer that's in some other country, all of a sudden you've just undermined your own operation and put yourself at real peril. It's all these everyday things, right? Making sure that you eat enough food for breakfast, making sure that you get enough rest, making sure that you don't use tap water when you brush your teeth. These simple everyday things can be catastrophic to your operational success. So our biggest concerns, the thing that we spend the most time preparing for, is how to be everyday people undercover, not operatives undercover.
Wow. Dude, so crazy, so cool. I feel like I'm a little bit closer to being James Bond after this conversation. Like a little bit.
That's the goal, man. That's a measure of success.
Yeah.
Right? And a little bit closer to being James Bond, we just compare that against where you started. And then that's how we really measure the progress.
Dude, I love it. Well, anything else you want to talk about before we wrap? Because I feel like I've learned a ton, but I mean, the floor is yours.
So, the thing that's always really important to me is I teach unfair advantages, right? Like I'm out here, we're teaching spy hacks.
Yeah.
There are people who are listening to this right now saying, I don't know if I feel comfortable using those things, right? Like that's what spies do, and spies are criminals. So why would I do those things? And it's been a real exploratory journey for me too, trying to build a business where I teach spy tactics, spy tools, spy tricks, right? The truth is, bad guys know how to do these things because they've learned from their bad guy friends, and they've learned in the school of hard knocks. They've learned in the street how to do these things. If good guys don't share these skills with each other, then the bad guys will always have the advantage. So the way I see it is, will I accidentally teach some bad guys? Are there criminals who watch my podcast and try to learn how to manipulate whatever? Yeah, for sure. But the vast majority of the people watching are good guys who will now be prepared to resist manipulation from a bad guy. So that's how I see it. And for me, it's a really important thing to understand in a transparent transactional world. There will always be good guys and bad guys. By being a good guy is not just choosing not to be a bad guy, right? Choosing not to be a bad guy is the same as choosing not to be a good guy. It makes you undecided. But if you choose to use bad guy skills to do good things, you're a good guy.
Couldn't agree more. Do you think in general that people should have combat skills, self-defense skills, be armed generally?
So those are three different things.
Yeah.
And I would say absolutely people should have self-defense skills. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have hand-to-hand combat skills, and it most certainly doesn't mean you need to be armed, right? You can have a self-defense skill by just having a alarm in your pocket, right? Like a digital alarm, where you pull a little cord and you have a personal alarm that sets off an alarm noise. Now you're safer. You're safer than you were without it.
Yeah.
Right? A whistle, you're safer than you were without it. Even something as simple as shoes with laces. If you have shoes with laces, you're basically wearing the safest footwear you can possibly wear.
Why is that?
Because sandals or flip-flops or anything else can slip off.
Yeah, you're right. Wow.
Right? Imagine having to run through a street that's got rocks and glass in it in flip-flops versus tennis shoes.
Like always be prepared to run.
Right. That's self-defense.
Wow.
So that's the kind of stuff I always want to encourage people to have, right? Just always kind of be thinking through a lens of personal security, not because you're afraid of the world, but because you're prepared for whatever unexpected thing the world might throw at you.
Yeah.
There's tons of value in that.
Yeah. My dad would always say, it's not about you being a good driver. You got to look out for the other guy.
Yeah, it's true, right? And you're saving lives every time you drive safely, because you're saving your own life and the lives of everybody who's around you.
Damn. So true. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.